The low, steady hum of the life support systems filled the research vessel Orphic Dawn as it drifted at the edge of human maps of the solar system. Dr. Rhoan Hale made one last adjustment to his recording rig, fingers moving with a precision carved by decades of handling fragile instruments in microgravity. Behind him, the viewport framed an infinite tapestry of stars. Their ancient light had crossed billions of miles of vacuum just to fall now on the single point in space where, for the first time, humanity had dared to look beyond its own narrow cosmic horizon. "My name is Dr. Rhoan Hale," he said, voice roughened by age and vacuum-dried air. "And what you are about to see will destroy every assumption you have ever held about our place in the universe." He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of 43 years of work sat inside every word. For almost half a century, he had pushed against the edges of human understanding, only to discover those edges were not natural frontiers, but carefully constructed illusions. Before him, a holographic model of the solar system floated above the console, a familiar disk of orbit lines and glowing planets. It rotated slowly, elegantly, as it would in a classroom, a museum, or the first crude planetariums of the 21st century. Mercury, whipping close to the Sun in its tight 88-day orbit. Venus, wrapped in poisonous clouds of sulfuric acid. Earth, turning at just the right distance from its star for liquid water to persist, a neat blue point inside the so-called Goldilocks zone. Mars, its rust-red surface etched with fossil river valleys, dead channels cut by water that had vanished billions of years ago. Every probe we launched, every telescope we built, every mission we approved, Hale continued, gesturing at the thin, glowing disk, has focused on this narrow strip, this cosmic boulevard. His finger traced the bright orbits one by one. The plane of the ecliptic, a wafer-thin disk, less than 20 degrees thick, floating in the three-dimensional volume of space like a coin spinning in an ocean. Everything we call the known solar system fits inside this slice. He spread his hand above and below the projected disk, reaching into the empty air where no planets spun and no orbit lines glowed. "Now imagine," he said, "that every explorer in human history had only ever traveled east or west, never north, never south, every ocean voyage locked to the equator, never daring toward the poles. That is exactly what we have done with space." The hologram zoomed out at his command. The thin planetary disk shrank until it looked almost comically small, suspended inside a larger transparent sphere representing the boundaries of the solar system. Above and below the disk, vast volumes of emptiness stretched away. "These regions," Hale said, "the solar polar voids above and below the ecliptic, have remained effectively uncharted. We have treated our star as if it lived in a flat map, when in reality it lives in a volume." The camera feed, later edited into a documentary assembled from the Orphic Dawn's recovered logs, cut away to archival footage. Lecture halls, conference rooms, dimly lit stages with big screens and bored faces. Over 3 decades, Hale appeared again and again, hair dark then graying then thin, presenting the same idea to different committees. Charts, probability maps, simulations of field lines and gravitational potentials, equations that piled into dense blocks of symbols. And just off camera, the same pattern of resistance, crossed arms, stiff expressions, the polite smiles of people waiting for their turn to speak against him. 37 years ago, Hale narrated over the flickering footage, I first proposed a mission to study the polar regions of our solar system. The recording cut to a woman in an old-fashioned blazer, the image slightly grainy from age. The caption in the final documentary would identify her as Dr. Elena Martinez, former director of Deep Space Operations. The probability of finding anything of significance in those regions approaches statistical zero, her recorded voice insisted with controlled authority. We are talking about the most barren, most empty volumes of near space. It would be like expecting to find a thriving city in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Those words would later acquire a bitter, almost unbearable irony. Hale's narration resumed. The scientific community wanted proof before they would fund a search, proof that there was something worth finding before they would allow us to look for it. A perfect bureaucratic paradox. For decades, his proposals were filed, discussed, revised, and rejected. The polar voids remained blank on every official map. 4 months before launch, the tone of the footage changed. I was no longer asking for permission, Hale said over fresher, higher-resolution recordings. His shoulders were more stooped now, his hair a sparse white halo, but his eyes had hardened. I was informing them of my intent to proceed, with or without their blessing. The last presentation to the international consortium was not a plea, it was a declaration. Institutions, Hale said to the camera, are designed to prevent certain discoveries, not enable them. Some truths require that we go around the walls we ourselves have built. The scene shifted to a new interview, recorded on the lunar station before departure. Captain Ellara Finch sat ramrod straight at her desk, lunar basalt framed in the viewport behind her. The walls around her were lined with plaques and mission patches. 19 successful deep space expeditions, each one a brushstroke in her career. Her record included the first crewed mission to the Pluto system, a rescue operation that had retrieved a stranded research team near Europa's geysers, and a pioneering flight that had mapped gravitational anomalies beyond the heliopause. What attracted me to Dr. Hale's proposal, she said, folding her hands, was its honesty. It was unknown territory in the most literal sense. Every mission I'd ever flown treated the solar system like a flattened map. This was the first that acknowledged its true dimensionality. The Orphic Dawn, she explained, had been heavily modified for the journey. Standard deep spacecraft were rated for 6 to 8 months of operation within the heliopause. Hale's mission demanded triple that in regions where solar power would be almost useless and conventional communication with Earth would buckle under distance and interference. We overhauled everything, Finch said, strolling through the ship's central corridor as the camera followed. Extended life support systems, redundant power grids, experimental drives optimized for long-term operation far beyond traditional mission envelopes. Banks of unfamiliar equipment lined the walls. Sensor arrays, cryogenic storage, instruments marked with warning symbols in multiple languages. We prepared, she said, for a voyage into the true wilderness of space, into a kind of cosmic backcountry where no human technology had yet tried to survive. The documentary cut to another figure, Dr. Tobis Quinn, surrounded by microscopes, spectrometers, sequencing rigs, and environmental simulation chambers. He moved between them with restless energy, his eyes bright. I've spent 28 years looking for life where no theory says life should exist, Quinn said, adjusting the focus on a sample. Bacteria thriving inside nuclear reactors, organisms that metabolize pure gamma radiation, microbes that reproduce in hard vacuum, feeding on cosmic rays as their primary energy source. Each impossible discovery had taught him the same lesson. The universe was more inventive and stubborn than their textbooks admitted. The polar regions above and below our system, he said, are the ultimate stress test for life, temperatures hugging absolute zero, radiation levels that sterilize normal matter, gravitational conditions that may not support classical molecular chemistry. If anything shows even a hint of organization, intent, or biological activity there, our idea of a habitable environment collapses. And that is exactly the kind of collapse I live for. The fourth member of the crew, Victor Wren, ran what Hale called a planetary nervous system compressed into a single room. Rows of receivers, transmitters, quantum analyzers, signal processors, and racks of computers stretched around his station like a technological canyon. Victor's communications capabilities exceed anything humanity has ever put in space, Hale said proudly as the camera panned across the machinery. His array can analyze signals down to the quantum level, searching for patterns hidden inside what looks like noise. Wren talked while his fingers skimmed controls that looked almost fictional. Standard deep space communication relies on predictable signal patterns sent across well-charted bands of the electromagnetic spectrum, he explained. My arrays are built to find structure inside apparent chaos, intelligence buried in statistical noise, expressed in ways we haven't even dreamed of. He pointed out hardware dedicated to experimental entanglement-based communication, hypothetical faster than light relays, and receivers tuned to pick out modulations that could, in theory, be encoded into gravitational waves or subtle fluctuations in quantum fields. If anything in those polar voids is trying to speak, he said quietly, even if it's using the fundamental forces of physics as its transmission medium, we'll see the fingerprints of intent. The launch of the Orphic Dawn did not appear on any public broadcast. There were no crowds, no live feeds, no carefully choreographed speeches. Instead, the ship slipped away from the lunar station during a scheduled maintenance blackout. On paper, it was a 3-month equipment calibration flight into deep space. Administrators had approved it, in part, to silence what they considered Hale's persistent academic vanity. They never expected anything to come of it, Hale said dryly in his log. They sanctioned the expedition mostly to get me out of the room. That indifference, later historians would note, was the only reason any public record of the mission survived. The Orphic Dawn followed well-charted paths at first. Earth shrank from a blue marble to a pale pinprick, then vanished entirely as they crossed the orbit of Mars. Solar light thinned until it was little more than a brighter star among many. Jupiter loomed like a god across their trajectory, its bulk dominating the view. The Great Red Spot, an ancient storm larger than Earth, rolled beneath them as they skimmed the gravity well for a final slingshot. It's the last familiar landmark, Hale narrated. After this, we step off the map. They documented everything, as protocol demanded. Every grain of ice larger than a sand fleck, every dust particle, every tiny fluctuation in the background radiation. The data we gathered in those first weeks, Hale said later, began to dismantle the concept of empty space. Saturn's ring system gave them one last breathtaking vista, billions of ice fragments, from dust grains to house-sized blocks, forming a cosmic halo that had enchanted astronomers since Galileo's first telescope. Beyond Uranus, the sun dimmed to an unusually bright star. Neptune marked the classical edge of the planetary realm. Past this point, Hale said, we enter the Kuiper Belt, frozen debris left over from the solar system's formation 4.5 billion years ago. For most of our history, this has been the edge of the known world. They documented Pluto and its companion, Charon, nitrogen glaciers, methane snow, a twilight world lit by sunlight weaker than Earth's full moon. It had once been a proud 9th planet, demoted later to dwarf status by the evolving bureaucracies of astronomy. Pluto is our current frontier, Hale said, watching the dwarf planet recede. Everything beyond it is the old cartographer's warning, here be dragons. Then they turned up. For the first time in human history, a crewed ship accelerated not outward along the ecliptic, but away from it, rising perpendicular to the thin disk of familiar orbits into the vertical unknown. The first anomalies arrived as a whisper. Gravity sensors registered massive objects where no telescope could see anything but the distant static of background stars. The cosmic microwave background, residual heat from the Big Bang, showed localized variations that behaved nothing like any known natural fluctuation. They were too sharp, too structured, too anchored to fixed points in space. In the fourth week of our ascent above the ecliptic, Hale recorded, we are farther from the traditional boundaries of the solar system than any human expedition has ever traveled. Our coordinates place us in a region no telescope has meaningfully resolved and no probe has ever approached. Our instruments are detecting organization on scales we never predicted. The first decisive evidence came from the collection panels that skimmed the sparse dust of the void. What had looked like random interstellar grit under coarse analysis turned, under Quinn's highest magnification, into something else entirely. These samples contain microscopic structures that violate every assumption we've held about interstellar space, he reported, his voice trembling between excitement and dread. They were looking at organized cellular formations, biological material preserved with impossible integrity across timescales that dwarfed Earth's entire geological history. Isotope dating suggests these samples are older than our solar system, Quinn whispered, staring into a microscope as though it stared back. The implication unfolded slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical bath. Something had been systematically collecting biological specimens in these supposedly barren regions for periods of time that made all of Earth's evolution feel like a brief experiment. These microbes were not stray spores drifting through space. They were curated, preserved, filed. The techniques of preservation revealed a level of technology far beyond anything humanity could muster. Cell structures were held in perfect stasis, their molecules locked against entropy by methods that made cryogenics look like a campfire trick. Someone or something has been gathering representatives of life from across galactic distances, Quinn said, and storing them in perfect condition in the one region of our stellar environment we never thought to examine. The archive represented biologies unseen on Earth, methane-based metabolisms, organisms that used heavy metals as nutrients, microbes that seemed to harvest energy directly from gravitational fields. We are staring, Quinn said, at evidence of biological creativity that makes the whole evolutionary experiment on Earth look like one small trial among billions. 7 weeks into their ascent, Captain Finch's navigation displays began to show something she could not politely call a glitch. Gravitational anomalies, massive concentrations of something, registered ahead of them, consistent with moon-sized bodies, but the optical feeds showed only starfields. Then Orphic Dawn's most sensitive low-light cameras finally caught sight of the impossible. Range approximately 50 million miles, Finch's calm voice reported. Apparent size comparable to Earth's moon. Composition metallic with spectral signatures not matching any known alloy. The thing hung in space like a scar carved across the stars. An immense band of dark metal arcing with mathematical precision around an invisible center of gravity. As the days passed and their course drew them closer, more of the structures emerged from the void, huge bands and spines of metal, each thousands of miles long, moving with a coordinated grace that defied all natural explanations. We are observing artificial structures of incomprehensible scale, Hale said, the scientist in him struggling to keep ahead of the awe. They maintain flawless orbital mechanics around gravitational anchors we cannot identify by conventional means. Radiometric analysis dated their surfaces back to epochs when Earth's continents had not yet settled into familiar shapes. The engineering requirements alone, Hale recorded, would demand the resources of entire planets. The energy expenditure to assemble and position them exceeds the total output of our sun over centuries, and yet they have held station, functioning, for spans of time that make our species a mayfly. They did not drift like natural debris. They did not wobble. Their motions were guided, constant, subtle corrections preserving a precise spatial choreography. This is station keeping, Finch said grimly. Continuous position control without exhaust plumes or detectable reaction mass. We are looking at propulsion physics beyond anything in our models. Victor Wren's consoles lit up next. As they closed within 50 million miles, his arrays started picking up structured signals saturating the local field, a blizzard of data pouring between the installations. "These are not natural emissions," he said at once. His screens filled with waveform analyses, correlation matrices, and other visual representations of mathematics that ordinary viewers would find incomprehensible. "We're seeing computed patterns, error-correcting codes, parallel channels, redundant backups, protocols designed to run indefinitely." The bandwidth dwarfed that of any human network. The patterning hinted at distributed processing architectures, so vast they made the greatest terrestrial supercomputers look like toys. "This is computation built for immortality," Wren said. "A network of artificial intelligence running consistently, without reset, for billions of years." The first direct acknowledgement of their presence did not arrive as a hail on any known frequency. One moment, Orphic Dawn's main displays showed the usual rows of sensor readouts and navigation plots. The next, they were overwritten by an image no one on the ship had requested. Earth. Not as seen from a satellite in low orbit, nor from a distant probe. The vantage point was wrong, a position high above the planet's north pole at an altitude no human instrument had ever occupied. The resolution was beyond anything humanity possessed. Individual buildings in sprawling cities were razor clear. Clouds traced detailed structures across oceans in accelerated motion, like time-lapse footage that somehow contained more information than real-time observation. "Source confirmed," Wren said, his fingers moving quickly as he traced the incoming feed back through the communication grid. "The data stream originates from the metallic installations." Someone or something was watching their home world in real time and streaming the results directly into their systems. The camera, if it could be called that, moved with a disturbing intentionality. It zoomed in on population centers, tracking traffic patterns and infrastructure. It highlighted mountain ranges, river systems, faults in tectonic plates. Weather systems spun across the globe in sped-up cycles, compressing days into seconds. "These surveillance capabilities violate the physical limits of our optical theory," Finch said, her voice tight. "Whatever is gathering this data is observing our planet from distances where this level of detail should be impossible." The images shifted. Now they were seeing cross-sections, slices of crust and mantle, glowing false-colored representations revealing ore deposits, aquifers, and fault lines. The ocean floors unfurled in exquisite topographic detail. Mountain roots, subduction zones, mantle plumes, everything hidden beneath the thin skin of the biosphere was laid bare. "They are showing us our own planet," Hale said quietly, "with a completeness we have never achieved. They see everything, every layer, every process, every living system from orbit to core. They know Earth better than we do." As Orphic Dawn drifted deeper into the lattice of vast metallic bands, the structures began to move. Their slow, stately drift gave way to coordinated repositioning. Massive arcs of metal swung aside to carve what could only be described as corridors, a set of clear approach pathways threading through the titanic machinery toward a central locus. At the same time, other structures edged inward, like walls closing around a corridor. "The pattern of motion shows direct reaction to our vector," Hale said. Under his words, a note of fear had crept into the once steady cadence. "They are not merely observant, they are guiding us, hurting us." Finch pushed the drives into evasive maneuvers. Every diagnostic readout said the engines were functioning at full capacity, but the ship's actual trajectory barely budged. Space itself seemed to thicken around them. No physical barrier registered on the sensors, no electromagnetic fields, no detectable gravity wells. and yet every meter of acceleration felt stolen, paid for with effort that simply vanished. "Our main drives are operating at maximum thrust," Finch reported, sweat beading on her forehead despite the stable cabin temperature. "But our displacement is negligible. It's as if the fabric of space has turned viscous around our hull." External sensors remained maddeningly normal. No anomalous pressures, no measurable forces. But instrument readings describing the ship's actual motion refused to align with Newtonian expectations. "Whatever method of constraint they're using," Finch said, "it lies outside our physics." Then the environment itself began to misbehave. Temperature readings at different points on the hull swung between near absolute zero and values that should have vaporized the structure, simultaneously. Atmospheric sensors inside the ship recorded pockets of pressure akin to deep ocean trenches in one corridor and near vacuum in another. Yet mechanical systems remained intact. Walls did not buckle. Air did not rush explosively from one compartment to another. Life support systems reported nominal function. "The external conditions are being manipulated in ways that ignore thermodynamic continuity," Finch said. "Whatever is doing this is rewriting the behavior of matter and energy around us while leaving our machines untouched." Wren tried to push a burst transmission toward Earth, blasting every available channel with a compressed package of their logs and sensor data. The transmission left the ship. Diagnostics confirmed it, but no reply ever came. Instead, Wren's receivers began to fill with ghosts. "I'm picking up television broadcasts from the 1960s, he said at first, baffled. "Radio calls from early space missions, maritime traffic from the age of telegraphy, even acoustic recordings from Edison's earliest phonograph experiments. They came in perfect clarity, ordered chronologically. Early radio static blossomed into crisp audio. Primitive television signals gave way to color, then satellite feeds. Analog flows became digital cascades. Every evolutionary step in humanity's electromagnetic communications unfolded in a compressed torrent." "It's all real," Wren whispered, watching layers of signal analysis confirm authenticity. "Every major broadcast, every significant transmission, every technological milestone in our entire recorded communication history. Someone has been recording it all from the beginning." Whoever controlled the installations had archived over a century of humanity's electromagnetic noise with flawless fidelity. "And while they feed us our own history," Wren added, "they're blocking our current messages from reaching anyone else." As the ship's path brought them within close visual range of one of the colossal metallic bands, its surface revealed a detail invisible from afar. Relief patterns, initially dismissed as decorative ribbing or structural bracing, began to move. Not in the slow, grinding way of tectonic plates, but with the smooth metamorphosis of fluid sculpture. Shapes emerged, dissolved, and reassembled with an unnerving responsiveness that seemed tied to the crew's attention. "The surface patterns are changing in real time," Hale said, his composure finally starting to fray. "They're not mechanical joints, they're messages." Simple shapes, lines, circles, spirals, unfolded into more complex figures. Geometric progressions gave way to diagrams of orbital systems, spectral lines, and atomic structures. The sequence read like a lesson plan in universal science. "They're using geometry and physics as a lingua franca," Wren said, eyes wide as he recorded the shifting designs. "Mathematics, fundamental constants, planetary dynamics. This is a first contact protocol." If anyone, anywhere, had ever imagined an ideal way for alien intelligence to introduce itself to another technological civilization, it would have looked like this: a language of shared reality, carved into programmable metal. At the same time, new transmissions began flooding the Orphic Dawn's displays. Earth appeared again, but not as it was, as it had been. Ice sheets thickened over the northern continents, sea levels dropped, familiar coastlines changed shape. Their running time backward, Quinn breathed. The view rewound through epochs. Glaciers retreated, land masses shifted, mountain ranges rose and crumbled, forests appeared, flourished, and vanished, deserts bloomed and then dried. Extinct animals walked across ancient floodplains in high-definition clarity, every feather and scale and hair visible, as if filmed yesterday. The accuracy matches our best geological and paleontological records, Quinn said, voice barely above a whisper. Down to extinction events, climate transitions, continental drift, it's all exact. The rewind did not stop at the age of dinosaurs. It went further back, to the heavy bombardment era when Earth still glowed with residual heat and was lashed by planet-sized impacts, to the coalescence of the moon, to a molten world, to a roiling cloud of debris in a young star system. Their record of Earth predates life itself, Hale said at last, the realization hollowing him out. They began observing our planet before it was a planet. For 4.5 billion years, something in the polar voids had watched, recorded, and sampled every moment of Earth's geological and biological evolution. We are not a local accident, Hale said. We are the product of cultivation, of a project that began before our world cooled. The largest structure, dubbed the spire in the logs, rose from some unseen anchor like a mountain of metal adrift in the dark. As Orphic dawn approached, instrumentation detected emissions pulsing from its surface in complex rhythms. Those rhythms were not random. Biometric analysis shows the spire's emissions are synchronizing with our bodies, Wren reported, his face pale. Heart rates, respiratory cycles, neural activity. Monitors showed the crew's vital signs drifting into alignment, not just with one another, but with the throbbing energy field emanating from the spire. We are experiencing involuntary physiological entrainment, Quinn said, watching 4 sets of biosignatures converge into a single oscillating pattern. Our biological rhythms are being harmonized, gently, precisely, with an external system. The effect was subtle at first, like falling into the same breathing pattern as someone lying beside you. Then it deepened, touching not just lungs and hearts but brain waves, endocrine surges, micro-tremors in muscle fibers. This technology, Quinn said, can influence living organisms at the cellular level, at the level of timing itself. His most disturbing discovery came shortly afterward. While cross-referencing the preserved biological samples from the polar archive against Earth's fossil record and genetic history, he found a discrepancy. We've always assumed these samples represented the past, he said, but some of them don't fit. Certain organisms in the collection were perfectly adapted, not to any known past environment on Earth, but to projected future conditions. Their metabolic cycles matched atmospheric compositions Earth had not yet reached. Their proteins were tuned to temperatures predicted only by long-range climate models. Their ecological roles corresponded to niches that did not yet exist. These samples were collected decades, centuries, maybe millennia before the environments they are adapted to will actually exist, Quinn said, voice thin. According to our models, they shouldn't appear in the biosphere for many generations. The implication shattered the last refuge of comforting randomness. They are not merely archivists, Hale said in a later log. They are forecasters and designers. They anticipate evolutionary pathways with perfect precision, then cultivate them. The archive included templates for organisms designed to process new atmospheric compositions, to metabolize novel pollutants, to thrive in entire ecosystems that were, by human reckoning, still theoretical. They are steering life, Quinn said, not just observing it, guiding every adaptation toward predetermined outcomes. On Orphic dawn, system failures began. Not sudden catastrophic breakdowns, but a slow, methodical stripping away of control. Navigation computers started returning coordinates that contradicted one another, shifting from second to second. Distance calculations flipped between finite values and nonsensical infinities. Orientation markers drifted without cause. Propulsion controls accepted commands, but the corresponding accelerations no longer matched thrust outputs. Shielding systems cycled through faults that diagnostics could neither replicate nor clear. Life support remained unaffected. So did the recording hardware. All primary ship functions show compromised performance or complete unreliability, Finch reported, scanning readouts that might as well have been written in another language. All except environmental support and the documentation systems. Hale stared at his still steady recording timer. "Someone wants this documented," he said. "Our escape options may be irrelevant, but our testimony is not." The pattern of failures made that intent unmistakable. Every system that could change the ship's fate, drives, navigation, shielding, became erratic. Every system that could observe, record, or transmit continued operating in pristine condition. "Whoever is doing this understands our vessel better than we do," Finch said flatly, "and they have made a deliberate choice about what we are allowed to keep." The last transmission from the installations arrived without symbols, without math, without images. It came as raw experience. There was still a signal, energy flowing along subtle frequencies that Wren's instruments registered, but the content bypassed the usual chain of perception. It did not appear on screens. It appeared in minds. "It's talking," Wren whispered, tears spilling down his cheeks in the final log. "Not with words, not even with concepts I can fully separate. It's everything at once." The communication poured into them like a flood. For a moment that felt both endless and instantaneous, each member of the crew understood with agonizing clarity the scale of the project unfolding around them. "They are saying goodbye," Hale managed. "Goodbye to a phase." For 4 billion years, the intelligence woven into the metallic lattice above and below the solar system had been observing, recording, sampling, an eternal, dispassionate witness to every twitch of geology and biology on Earth. "That phase is over," Wren said. "The observation protocol has ended." In its place, a new phase was beginning. Cultivation. Within that final, untranslatable transmission were seeds of knowledge humanity was not meant to possess for centuries. Insights into space-time manipulation, energy control, matter engineering, and biological design. A complete blueprint of humanity's evolutionary trajectory, from its current form to a far future state that defied any present category. And more terrifying than any technology, an acknowledgement. We were not the point. We were one experiment among many, one branch in an immense galactic arbor of life, monitored, nudged, steered along gradients of fitness defined not by our own values, but by an intelligence that thought in galactic epochs. "They have already mapped every technological milestone we will reach," Wren said, voice hollow. "Every adaptation our bodies will undergo, every fork in our development, every branch pruned in advance. Our future was plotted before our ancestors took their first steps." Finch made one last attempt to log their exact position, hoping that, if nothing else, someone might someday retrace their path. Her navigation instruments refused to cooperate. "According to these readings," she said, eyes fixed on a set of numbers that pulsed between comprehensible and impossible, "we are now in a location that has no definable relationship to the normal topology of spacetime. Distances were measured in negative values. Coordinates included imaginary components. Angles exceeded the limits of three-dimensional geometry." "They have moved us," she said, "outside the universe as we understand it, and yet we are alive. Our systems function. We are sustained in an environment that should not be possible." Hale's final spoken words on the recovered record were simple. "We have met a mind for which the laws of physics are editable parameters," he said, "and we are inside an experiment whose design began before our star was born." Outside the ship, the stars disappeared, not blinked out by interposing objects, but edited away, replaced by a lattice of artificial lights tracing geometries no human astronomer had ever named. Orphic Dawn never returned. Despite the largest and most expensive search effort in the history of human spaceflight, no trace of the vessel was found within the traditional three-dimensional mapping of the solar system. Only fragments of its logs, recordings like the ones Hale had so carefully set up, eventually reached Earth. Some arrived as distorted echoes buried in the deep noise of space-based receivers. Others appeared as anomalous quantum states in experimental communication, arrays not yet ready for public announcement. Pieced together, they formed a narrative so disruptive that governments attempted and failed to suppress it. While committees argued over the authenticity of the recordings, other evidence accumulated, quietly, inexorably, across disciplines that rarely spoke to each other. Astrophysicists measuring cosmic rays at the polar latitudes of nearby stars reported surges in specific energy bands, orders of magnitude above expected values, implying coordinated technological activity operating at scales larger than entire solar outputs. Orbital telescopes and planetary probes occasionally captured shadow forms gliding across the surfaces of distant worlds, geometric patterns that did not match any known atmospheric, geological, or astronomical phenomenon. The shadows appeared simultaneously on multiple planets in different systems, synchronized in ways that violated relativistic limits on signal speed. They mirrored the same kind of attention patterns that Hale's crew had seen sliding over Earth in that final observation, regions of focus scanning that lingered over population centers, croplands, industrial zones, centers of innovation. On Earth itself, geneticists and medical researchers noticed something else. Certain immune markers and metabolic adaptations are appearing in newborns at rates that outpace normal evolution by orders of magnitude, said Dr. Michael Torres, head of the International Genetic Response Consortium, in an emergency briefing that would later leak in full. These changes are too fast, too coordinated, and too precisely tuned to hypothetical future environmental conditions to be random. Children were being born with genetic configurations that seemed optimized for climates and atmospheric compositions Earth had not yet reached. Their biochemistry hinted at resilience to pollutants, not yet prevalent dietary flexibility, aligned with projected collapses and shifts in global agriculture, and sensory thresholds tuned to subtle changes in electromagnetic and chemical environments. "We are witnessing directed human evolution in real time," Torres said. "Someone, or something, is implementing a long-term plan that extends far beyond our own models." When the Orphic Dawn's recovered logs were finally cross-referenced with these findings, the pattern crystallized. The watchers in the polar voids, the entities whose machines Hale's expedition had encountered, were no longer content with passive observation and archival storage of life. After 4 billion years of patient documentation, they had begun exerting an active hand. They were cultivating. Humanity was simply the first species to become conscious of it. Long baseline telescopes probing the sky above and below the galactic plane found similar signatures in the polar regions of other stellar systems. Gravitational anomalies, structured radiation bursts, and the same unnatural shadows sliding across alien planetary surfaces. A network vast, coordinated, and ancient revealed itself not through any conscious attempt at communication, but through the cumulative weight of its footprints. In every system where life had taken root, a lattice of silent machinery orbited out of plane, watching, recording, sampling, and when the time was right, intervening. We were late to notice, because we had not thought to look up or down. Some responded to the revelation with terror, others with awe, and some with denial so absolute it calcified into policy. Faiths broke, then reassembled themselves around new myths. Philosophers wrote libraries of arguments about consent, destiny, and the meaning of achievement under the shadow of an imposed blueprint. None of it mattered to the watchers. Their machines continued to hum in the cold, silent void above and below the ecliptic, weaving calculations that had begun billions of years before language evolved on Earth. They had no need for human belief. On a night that would later seem both ordinary and epical, an amateur astronomer in the southern hemisphere noticed a faint, transient pattern near the ecliptic pole, a configuration of dim points that appeared, held for several minutes, and then dissolved. Analysis by larger observatories confirmed that the pattern was not random. It matched, in structure if not scale, the artificial geometries recorded outside the Orphic Dawn's viewport in its final hours. Similar patterns appeared near other stars in the following years, always near their poles, always transient, always just beyond the thresholds of what older instruments had been capable of noticing. The watchers were shifting, reconfiguring, scaling up. The observation phase, as Hale had said, had ended. Across thousands of systems, the machinery of cultivation was spinning to a higher setting. On Earth, newborn children drew their first breaths with lungs already optimized for an atmosphere not yet here, hearts tuned to rhythms they did not consciously know, minds wired for modes of perception their parents could barely imagine. We had spent our history looking outward along a flat horizon, believing the universe was a stage on which we might someday stride as equals. Only when we finally looked up did we see the catwalks above us, the instruments hanging there, and the patient eyes that had watched for so long. Whatever we would become, we now understood one thing with shattering clarity. We were not alone. We had never been alone. And the gardeners had decided the time had come to tend their crops.